Hi, everybody. There's a lovely song that I'm sure you've all heard.
You always hurt the one you love, the one you shouldn't hurt at all. You always take the sweetest rose and crush it till the petals fall.
You always hurt the one you love, the one you shouldn't hurt at all. This song has a particular poignance for our topic today because we'll be considering why otherwise good people do horrible things to other good people, especially helpful, caring, decent, and moral people. Like, are you in a bad marriage and someone good is trying to help you get out, but you don't leave? Do you have a useless political affiliation or group membership, but you stay even though your smart, good friend keeps telling you to shift? Do you live in a bad neighborhood but remain there even though a police officer or a teacher or priest is trying to help you get out? If you are in any uncomfortable, dysfunctional group or partnership and you find yourself increasingly isolated, cutting yourself off from good friends, family, or colleagues, then you just might want to hang around and continue listening. According to the theory established by the focus of this video, René Girard, there's no need to be surprised by the unfortunate fact that we good people can be very cruel to persons who care about and even love us, or by the fact that perfectly good people who might love or care about us hurt us. The fact is, according to Girard's mimetic theory, goodly you are just as cruel to goodly others as the contemptible, horrible, rotten creeps whom you've been believing have hurt you. But why is this the case? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, by the end of this ridiculously fascinating video, you will be able to explain the reasons for what Girard termed a primitive inclination to be cruel to the nicest people. Specifically, after learning about his mimetic theory, you will be able to explain 3 things. Number 1, why relatively good people have been malicious to you. 2, why goodly you have been malicious to other relatively good people. And 3, why this absurd malicious deviltry of fairly good people being horrible to other fairly good people constantly and continuously plays out among couples, groups, and even entire nations. But do you want to know the reason why right now? All right, I'll tell you. According to Professor Girard, the reason all this barbarism is being meted out among relatively good people by all of us is because our tribal unity, our unity in couples, partnerships, and groups, is more important than morality. While you think you care for the members of your group or partnership or spouse, even love them, you have problems that preclude you from enduring love. You have a tribal inclination, though, to stay together at all costs, and so, to stick together, you start being mean to the most helpful, caring, and loving people who are just on the periphery of your relationship. What's that? Our need for unity at the expense of eliminating good people around us exists on a primitive level that we cannot control without rules akin to those of a strict religious order. Again, our tribal unity is more important to us than the quality of the relationship within the tribe. We must maintain the tribe. It's a bit off for us to think of our marriage or corporate workplace as having tribal unity that we must preserve, but a tribe it is. A tribe protects its unity, does it not? A tribe of warriors knows it must maintain the tribe, the brand. And these days, perhaps the word brand is more relatable. Don't you and your spouse present as a sort of brand? Your place of employment, whether it is a newspaper, a delivery company, or a hair salon, presents as a brand, and everyone associated with it is expected to present as supportive of it. Even countries present as a brand, expecting their citizens and residents to behave as brand ambassadors, correct? Now, even though that unit, partnership, marriage, or country has its own problems, that tribe or unit will scapegoat and completely eliminate the most helpful outsider to that unit, just to keep the group together. Yes, you will completely subvert and sink that outer entity just to keep your unit united, unified, together. And so there you go. There's the first pithy paragraph about what this video will reveal, sort of like the first paragraph of a newspaper article, if you will, that most people only bother reading. Now, if you want to understand this theory in more depth, you are most welcome. Keep listening and enjoy. In my opinion, it behooves everyone to continue listening in order to fully grasp the serious implications this theory has for your real-life interactions, both in terms of personal relationships as well as social and political relationships. And once you understand this theory and recognize its patterns, well, you can't unknow it. So you will then be able to both predict and avoid this cycle. Oh, and those of you who by no fault of your own have become mildly addicted to the YouTube and TikTok talking point trend of the 2020s, namely narcissists and the malicious things that they say and do to good people. If you find you are presently triggered to instantly think of the word narcissists because I've mentioned mean and cruel people, well, I think you'll find this topic of Girard's mimetic theory a refreshing and much more insightful change. Narcissists, those self-absorbed people with their myriad ways of manipulating people and making them utterly miserable, wreak terribly detrimental havoc in relationships that have horrendous implications for society. However, by continuously analyzing them simply because everything about them, which is more than we need to know, constantly appears on our social media feeds, we overlook the blatant fact that narcissists do not hold exclusive domain over misery-making. The fact is, and you and I both know it, we good people are all quite capable of making and do make other perfectly good people extremely miserable. So let's take a refreshing break from all those videos about narcissism and give this fresh theory a chance. But to indulge your addiction to that topic in a relevant, not gratuitous manner, I shall address it at the conclusion of this video. And now, back to the topic. The theory we shall discuss is René Girard's mimetic theory, the theory that explains our primitive inclination to be not just cruel, but, as Girard described it, metaphysically violent to good people. Girard is the rare type of person who deserves the description brilliant. He was a polymath, historian, philosopher, anthropologist, literary critic, author, and professor. Girard was born in Avignon, France in 1923 and died in 2015 at the age of 91 in Stanford, California, where for years he had taught at the prestigious Stanford University. Upholding the definition of polymath, Girard had broad, deep knowledge about, well, everything. He was a keen observer and a prolific reader and writer. In fact, he wrote 20 books. Like anyone who develops a theory that captures people's attention and generates deep discussions, in his case, Girard noted patterns of human behavior that he saw occurring throughout written and observable history. He placed these patterns in various cultural contexts to see if patterns changed based on ethnicity, environments, religious affiliations, and so on. Ultimately, he concluded that no matter who, what, when, or where you ever were on this earth or in history, this pattern played out. Now, just because you may have never heard of René Girard doesn't mean his theory isn't socially significant or that it lacks relevance. On the contrary, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Girard was no slouch. What he thought, said, wrote, and lectured about mattered to people all over the world. He had an extraordinary mind. He taught at prestigious universities in the United States and received many international accolades and awards related to his profound intellectual contributions to academia and society. Thus, just about anything he said is highly worthy of our consideration. In fact, it might be the case that what he said was so profound that, well, just maybe some people don't want you to hear about it. They want you to hear about narcissism instead. But perhaps that's just my conspiracy mindset. Let us continue. Despite the lofty social plane Girard reached, his theory is elegantly clear and thus blissfully accessible. You see, Girard's observations weren't merely academic. They were simply true, and therefore meant for everyone to ponder. Considering the obvious serious implications of our being mean to nice people, isn't it high time that we started looking at the absurdity of making good people feel bad, if not doing worse to them, and doing whatever we can, what Girard tells us we can do, to correct the situation? Before continuing, let's become comfortable with the word mimetic, because it will be used frequently herein. Within the word, we see mime, a word that leads us to imagine a skinny French man wearing capri pants, black ballet slippers, and a black and white horizontal striped shirt, pretending to press the palms of his hands against an imaginary glass pane. Mimes imitate or mirror reality. Girard recognized and labeled our lifelong interactions with one another as mimesis, imitation. As toddlers, we begin our mimesis. We look around and start imitating as a means of blending in, joining with everyone around us. This process continues as we navigate our expanding social world. We feel an inclination to join in and do things like we see everyone else doing them, whatever that is. It is generally a very comfortable feeling to belong, to be part of a group, and get along with that group. In fact, depending on the group, our family, partnership, workplace, religious group, we might feel a powerful bond that we love to feel, that we value above all else because it just feels right, like a cozy blanket. And we will use mimesis to get along and maintain that bond. For most of us, anyway, as long as we can. We can call this loyalty or love, but what we might not want to always accept is that sometimes that group we belong to has serious problems we'd be better off walking away from. But instead, we cling to the group and find a very strange way of handling those problems by eliminating especially good people who are of most help to the group or partnership, or, as Girard wanted us to think of this unit, as a tribe. For according to him, it is a tribal inclination to do this. And although we might think of a tribe as a primitive social group, the fact is, despite what we think of as a very modern evolution in our social relationships, we are more primitive than we realize. In order for my viewers and listeners to best recognize and understand the reality of our primitive tribal nature, I am going to help you see it play out by discussing Girard's theory while juxtaposing it with the classic 1963 film directed by Peter Brook, Lord of the Flies, a story that neatly reveals it. The film was based on author William Golding's book of the same name. Many of you may be familiar with Lord of the Flies, which for decades has been required reading among high school or university students throughout the Western world. but for those unfamiliar with the plot, I shall provide a brief summary. In Lord of the Flies, we observe a sort of microcosm of a branch of society in the form of two groups of what we easily surmise as a couple dozen relatively pampered British schoolboys. For the sake of protecting their children from aerial bombings over London during World War II, presumably these lads had been flown out of England by their parents. Well, the plane in which they had been riding crashed on a remote tropical island. Because the pilots have died, the boys end up having to, well, apply mimesis when they haven't even had any chance in life to imitate anyone who's ever been in this horrible position. Suddenly, they've got to apply every essential bit of sense, energy, knowledge, and spirit of survival to manage to stay alive at least until they're rescued. As readers of the book, or observers of the excellent 1963 film version that you see on the screen here, we are all of us naturally quickly drawn into this disturbing but alluring scenario. After all, we're all fascinated by the prospect of how on earth children without adults or firm rules and with little experience living amid nature could manage. And of course, the critical mind quickly draws parallels to the very real outplay that occurs in daily life through its myriad uncomfortable social scenarios. Lord of the Flies serves as an outstanding example of Girard's theory because we see in the story that despite the unified group with a unified mimetic desire to survive, social connections nevertheless devolve naturally and inevitably to mimetic violence and even to death. Listen again as I repeat that. In Girard's mimetic theory, social connections devolve naturally and inevitably from the united origin, mimetic desire, to mimetic violence, and then, without the strict rules of government or religion, to death. In the story, the critical viewer can find several ideal representations of the fallout of the first part of Girard's theory. The first part is that of united mimetic desire. And just so that you're ready to catch the other key elements of Girard's theory, I will list them here now. Following number 1, mimetic desire, these include number 2, mimetic rivalry, 3, the double bind, 4, scapegoat, 5, sacrifice, 6, twin theory, and 7, violence. Lord of the Flies is gripping at the outset because the image of well-heeled British schoolchildren in wool flannel garb with matching caps, knee socks, and leather shoes, or wearing huge, black, billowing, ankle-length capes with enormous white ruffled collars and tasseled caps, clambering through jungle vines, serves in itself as an engaging, compelling contrast. But we are also drawn deeply into both the book because of Golding's superb character portrayals and to the film because of Brooks's incredible sensitivity in choosing child actors to play parts that within them possessed those characteristics innately. Before examining these characters, for those of you who fancy getting to know more about this book and film, I've provided a link in the description box to the video of the reunion film, in which the fact of his remarkable choices in actors is addressed by Brooke. Realize as we continue that this video in no way serves as an explication or formal breakdown of the work of Lord of the Flies, but rather is a consideration of René Girard's mimetic theory juxtaposed with Lord of the Flies. It is therefore a consideration using this microcosm about why people do mean things to nice people by examining situations that neatly roll out in the story and that serve well to clarify his theory. The usefulness of this to non-academics who don't particularly care about René Girard or his theory is that you just might learn something about your relationship dynamics that could open up a few windows of understanding. Like when you scratch your head and wonder why someone you thought was your friend was suddenly sharp with you, or why you were suddenly out of character and became sharp with someone you've long considered to be your friend, or why you didn't hire someone who was actually perfect for the job, or why you were fired even though you were considered perfect at your job. Now, back to the story. After a bit of splashing in the sea and subdued merriment, a heavy realization of their dire situation befalls the boys, and by midday they gather in an open space in the jungle to discuss what must be done, to establish priorities, rules, and assign tasks, quite ostensibly so that they can survive until help arrives. From the moment they gather and unite with this shared desire, a mimetic desire, as Girard would say, it is clear that the unity of these boys, this united tribe, has the most serious of all mimetic desires, that of survival. Now, this isn't just a story to watch and a parallel to consider and then forget. Keep in mind that for each of us who joins others in a mission, at the precise moment we agree, collaborate, unite in a group or partnership in what may seem to be a sealed bond in the thought of our unity, we have engaged in mimetic desire. For the couple marrying, the plan is to stay together forever. For the business, it is for every worker to adhere to the company's mission statement. For the orchestra, it is for each musician, whether violinist, flautist, or percussionist, to unite with that tribe and commit to fulfilling the task, the duty, with perfect loyalty. So, like the wedding couple who in one shared crystallized moment vows to live together happily ever after, the boys in Lord of the Flies share a desire too, crystallized when they hold their first meeting, to survive. Now, of course, as we all know, whether selected, elected, or neither, a leader always emerges. In any group or partnerships, naturally, someone rises above the other or others to make the big decisions, to organize, plan, set priorities, and establish rules, and then try to make sure that those rules are adhered to. In the case of our story, the leader who first emerges is Ralph, primarily because he has more boys from his group who vote for him. But we sense and are correct in our prediction that the taller, stronger, clearly more haughty and stentorian Jack will resoundingly overtake the attractive, calm, rational, and popular Ralph. And now we begin the fallout of mimetic desire. Step 2. Mimetic rivalry. Although these two natural-born leaders share a mirrored mimetic desire to survive, from the moment the announcement that a vote be taken for them is declared, Girard's mimetic rivalry is established. Rivalry for Girard commences the split second after you've formed your alliance. The split second after you've declared your united desire, because even if we share a desire, we each have a different way of going about achieving it. We're all brought up slightly differently. We are each exposed to different social realms that we've been able to imitate. And if we're children, especially perhaps somewhat sheltered and protected boys who've attended private boarding school, opportunities to witness the way various challenges could be handled are severely limited. Even though Jack and Ralph, as leaders of their respective group of lads, share the mimetic desire of survival, because each has his own vision of priorities and each his own unique sense of responsibility, oversight, management, self-discipline, care and compassion, empathy, and one might add the other pathy, psychopathy, the mimetic rivalry they experience and that always ensues in any united relationship leads to violence. And by this word violence, Girard did not necessarily mean physical violence, but metaphysical violence, which is a cruelty that cuts like a knife as it still hurts. This moment of what is actually then immediate Disunity is always a guilty pleasure for us to observe, say, during a wedding, when we can't help but wonder if the couple pledging their vows will divorce. Whether that couple divorces, though, isn't a matter of life or death. In the case of the boys, their need to maintain unity stemming from their mimetic desire to survive is imperative. Thus, they must follow clearly articulated rules with a united commitment as a matter of life or death. So, as with the married couple, but much more seriously, we wonder, will they be able to survive? Considering that the boys are, as Ralph says, not savages, but British, it seems that they are most capable of doing a bang-up job of collaborating in a most civilized way to manage their intentions to do the obvious needful, build shelters, maintain a fire with a visible plume of smoke, and source food. However, they do not. In fact, due to the ensuing mimetic rivalry, the level of social dysfunction, degradation, and degeneracy to which the boys ultimately succumb is shockingly dismaying. That is, until and unless we accept Girard's claim that all conflict and violence stems from united, original mimetic desire. This sounds very Buddhist, as Buddhism also cautions that we can only have peace when we have no desires. Girard's focus, however, is on united desire and its impact on the group, and then on good people who had nothing to do with the mimetic desire of the tribe in question. Let us continue. In the case of the stranded boys, physical violence does indeed ensue, and that violence is directed toward those on the periphery of the group. In this case, those who aren't quite insiders, but who neither cause the group any harm and who are possibly even more helpful to the group than the insiders themselves are. Without strict rules, no troubled group can help but become violent toward the most helpful outlier. That is, only with strict rules can the troubled group avoid enacting violence toward an innocent, helpful outlier, and that outlier shall become a scapegoat for their own inadequacies. When Ralph suggests that he and Jack scope out their environment, the boys appear to act as a team, willing to take this sensible step together. Now, according to Girard's theory, at this point, they are in a double bind. The double bind is defined by the awkward situation wherein a teacher or superior is in clear competition with his student. And in this case, Jack, who must be leader, is in clear competition with Ralph, who is more socially popular and thus superior in social status. In the double bind, the student, in this case Jack, always becomes a competitor. Jack is innately powerful and is compelled to control. Ultimately, he seizes power by wielding a weapon, a sort of Bowie knife that he happens to have. No one can compete with the power the knife reflects. The knife can be used to hunt and get meat from wild boars, just as later we will see Piggy's specs can be used to concentrate sunlight to make fire. Both show power, but Jack presents with all the physicality and charisma needed to garner followers. The new power dynamic is not lost on our perspicacious Piggy, a rather chubby, fairly clumsy, bespectacled asthmatic outlier. You know, someone on the outside looking in. Piggy recognizes the importance of the boys' need to stick to the rules, no matter how seemingly trivial. During the initial meeting, to maintain decorum, Ralph declares that the only one who could speak must be the one holding a large conch that he had found. Piggy enforces the rule by mildly admonishing Jack, who speaks out of turn, to follow it. Jack snaps, asking Piggy his name, but before Piggy has a chance to say it, Ralph announces, "He's Piggy." Piggy was the nickname Piggy had shared with Ralph in confidence, adding to not tell the others. This shocking, hurtful betrayal by Ralph leads to great guffaws of all the boys, but especially of Jack. Now, If we're decent enough people reading or watching this particular scene, our minds wander to what on earth provoked Ralph to so betray his friend. The attempt to draw cheap laughs at Piggy's expense can only be seen as either a senseless or calculated attempt to build an alliance of some sort with Jack, who we clearly see as his competitor, a sort of enemy. Ralph presents as a very strange lad indeed, as in this dangerous time he easily shifts alliances and in turn gives up whatever power he had. As an important aside here, this particular situation, that of Ralph's betrayal to his own demise, though perplexing, is clarified in the reading of the story, as one always gleans more details in a book. Throughout the book, author Golding applies the rhetorical device of enhancing a character by adding color imagery around them. In the case of Ralph, Golding intentionally surrounded Ralph in shades of gray. From the outset, Ralph walks on ashes, gray, through smoke, gray, and he removes a gray t-shirt. Gray is the color of neutrality, a color that enhances Ralph's neutral, non-committal nature. The fact that he presents as neutral in a case where sharp black and white distinctions must be made between right and wrong, good and evil, reveal that Ralph, despite his relatively mild-mannered nature, actually poses as a serious threat, not only to himself, but to all the boys, as he switches loyalties, even with his competitor, at the expense of his utterly loyal friend, with whom he had earlier shared mimetic desire as their own tribal unit. Ralph relinquishes control to Jack when he could have held his ground and established a united group for good with his intellectual counselor and rules-maker and rules-keeper, Piggy, by his side. Actually, the moment he shifts loyalty from Piggy to Jack, even though the knife clinches power for Jack, Ralph has already ceded power to him. At this point, Piggy is deeply unhappy, but tries his best to remain an important contributor to the matter of survival, not by scoping out the island or hunting, but by paying thoughtful attention to the deeply worried youngest boys. He calms them by regaling them with simple, comforting stories about his childhood home. He always provides encouragement to Ralph, and Piggy continues to provide the most important benefits, for it is the case that without Piggy, even if the boys find wild game to eat, they would not be able to cook it without the fire that could be made from the flame, started by holding Piggy's spectacle glass to catch and concentrate the hottest rays of the sun against some brush. Neither would they be able to do perhaps the most important job of all, create smoke to draw the attention of those on a potential rescue craft. Now, although our attention becomes keenly focused on this triumvirate of Ralph, Jack, and Piggy, with concerns of how their very different personalities will meld or clash in their united effort to survive, we are introduced to another character in light, gentle, nature-loving Simon. This oddly quiet, introspective, peaceful, and sensitive character captures our attention because he presents as a contrast to these others. Before I further describe Simon, I shall add the important fact that while these characters have rather sharp characteristics, which is indeed why they are characters, they present as quite typical, and that they are none of them what we might consider extreme. They are ordinary. They are the types that we recognize, are familiar with, or that we might even be, and hence they serve well as a microcosm of society. We see Simon early because he is invited by Ralph to accompany him and Jack to scope out the island. Simon, too, is a type we might see ourselves as, or can imagine, the type who, although faced with a terrible situation, can't help but take a moment to notice the beautiful azure, aqua, and tropical green nature surrounding him. He is delighted by a tiny chameleon that suddenly leaps onto his shoulder. He notices glistening droplets of rainwater on tropical leaves and takes in the noisy chirping of insects. Simon thus presents as quiet, thoughtful, introspective, in his own world. He is incapable of harming a fly. He is utterly harmless, unobtrusive, and in no way irritating, irksome, or annoying as we sense Piggy becomes. In this regard, we might say Simon presents as the most considerate. Is he complacent? Is he trying to stay under the radar and thus out of trouble? Well, it seems he's too young to be that calculating, but of course we have no way of knowing because he doesn't verbalize his thoughts. However, as actions always speak louder than words, his actions suggest that Simon is comfortable in this new environment and could manage living in it just fine if left to his own devices, without the rest, without the group, without the tribe with whom he is supposed to be fully united. Simon is special. This harmless, innocent child of nature, always bathed in light. Well, does he remind you of anyone? What on earth do you suppose happens to Simon? Of course, many of you already know, but perhaps now you know why. Because, well, what happens to those introspective independents among us, those who seem oddly content to be outside the group, those whose mere existence also reveals that there is no need for the group at all if you behave in a quiet, reserved, respectful, appreciative manner? Well, if you sense that Simon will be sacrificed, you would be correct. We might sense this fact, that good Simon has been murdered, as a simple conceit of irony that plays out in life as in fiction, a sort of nice guys finish last scenario. But what does play out is much less mysterious than irony, as Gerard pointed out. If you know nothing about this story, but now understand that the very, very good, almost Christ-like Simon is sacrificed, then what do you suppose would precipitate his death? What is the most decent act that would make his death seem incredibly absurd? Well, that action is that of telling the truth. When Simon announces that the weird, shadowy figure that some of the children have seen swinging in the dark, and that Jack has built up in their imaginations with tremendous fear as the beast that they must fight because it's a certain threat, Simon takes inspection on his own and discovers that this beast is one of the dead pilots caught in his own parachute and so swinging. When Simon destroys Jack's narrative, if you will, by publicly sharing this important truth that could stop the madness and fear, Jack riles up the boys to kill Simon, referring to him as the beast. And to be clear, Simon is not eliminated because his telling the truth exposes them all, and especially Jack, as buffoons. No. He is eliminated because he is decent and moral. That's it. It's that simple, and there is no need to overthink it or overanalyze it like a psychotherapist in a YouTube video going on and on. Simon's death naturally comes as a shock to Piggy and Ralph, and now Ralph clearly sees that he never should have let Jack hold the reins of power. But it's too late. Ralph flounders at trying to rally the boys to his side again. Meanwhile, Piggy goes into hiding, fearing that he's next. And he is correct. To remain united, remember, the group, which is beset by its own myriad problems, can only remain united by picking off all the best people surrounding it, unless there is a religious control. In this case, Piggy is next. Despite having been teased mercilessly by Jack, an example of Gerard's metaphysical violence, Piggy has consistently shown the greatest spiritual fortitude of all the boys. He considers fairness and common decency. Although Piggy never harms anyone and only provides wise and helpful suggestions, his presence is a metaphysical or psychological burden to all the boys, including his original best friend, Ralph. Piggy is, frankly, irritating. He lumbers when he walks. He can't breathe easily due to his asthma. He frequently pulls up his drooping socks, and he's forever cleaning his specs. He is simply very different from all the others, but not seemingly to any rational person in such a way that should elicit violence even among the most savage-minded. Gerard understood that when such characters, especially the most moral, are eliminated from scenarios where a group is having difficulty achieving a goal, partnership or group members would sense important relief and find value and regain purpose by sacrificing or eliminating that individual. Considering Girard's theory, Piggy becomes the group's next scapegoat who must be sacrificed to ensure unity of the group that is focused on achieving the desired goal, survival. In a typical literary analysis of this occurrence, one might refer to this dark feeling that something terrible will happen to Piggy as foreshadowing. But Girard, an anthropologist, remember, looked at patterns, real patterns of human behavior that could be observed among any group of people anywhere on Earth at any time. And this pattern of human nature that is a primitive inclination, nothing to be surprised by, not to be conflated with the ugly hand of irony or a dark twist of fate. Neither did it require psychological analysis. There's no need to understand someone's upbringing or self-esteem or confidence issues. Everyone will have difficulty in a group or partnership. Everyone will experience mimetic rivalry, and therefore everyone needs to follow strict religious level rules in order for society to not only function, but also to flourish. By placing this overlay, if you will, of Girard's theory against Golding's plot, we can see better than we ever could that Golding crafted an eerily well thought out and just remarkable work of fiction. We see that the boy's increasingly cruel mistreatment of Piggy, beginning with Ralph's betrayal, then the shattering of Piggy's glasses, and eventually his murder, reflects the stark reality of tribal behavior when there are no strict religious type rules. That is, when a God of love, light, mercy, and truth and justice is out of the picture. According to Girard, the primitive violence enacted on Simon and Piggy is predictable because it is basic to our natural group inclinations. And again, the reason for this violence toward perfectly good people is that when tension between or among a united party emerges due to differing views and actions on how to fulfill an otherwise joint mimetic desire, we have mimetic rivalry. And the only way this straggling united group or partnership could get immediate relief from the stress of their own difficulties is by momentarily joining together and attacking and sacrificing a scapegoat. And, unsurprisingly to Girard, this is going to be someone who is extremely helpful. So, how about we take a break from Lord of the Flies and bring this statement closer to home by considering a few real-life examples in which mimetic theory plays out in our everyday lives. Since we've been looking at the wild behavior of boys, perhaps the behavior of gang members has come to mind. In the gang, you're looking at a tribe with perhaps a united mimetic desire to just maintain a force that controls regional drug trade. Meanwhile, on the periphery of this united tribe, you've got loads of nice people, many selfless, dedicated civil servants, nurses, doctors, police, lawyers, priests, teachers, and so on, reaching out to help pull these members out of the group and into better, healthier, happier lives. There are people surrounding this tribe genuinely willing to risk their lives to help. These are the most helpful members of society, and yet, unless an individual or individuals within that group have a bit of religious affiliation, these helpful people will absolutely end up rejected at best or brutalized or killed at worst, just so that the tribe can stay together at all costs. You've got people living in areas, let us say neighborhood tribes, where schools are bad, water is bad, safety is non-existent, and even tiny area grocery stores are overpriced and don't even stock nutritious food. It might seem to the outside that people simply cannot leave these areas because of their extreme poverty. But that isn't necessarily the case. The fact is, in the U.S. anyway, tremendous assistance is available in the form of education, housing, and the help of nonprofit organizations that have tremendously good, helpful individuals extending a hand, saying, "I'll pull you up and out of there through X, Y, and Z." And yet, those in the neighborhood tribe will say, "Well, I've got to stay here because these are my people." In fact, they might actually say, "This is my tribe." They will stay because they share the same mimetic desire of what? Well, just staying together because they are family, acknowledging we may have our serious problems, but family is family at all costs. So we'll carry this heavy chip on our shoulders, but this is our chip to bear, and we'll deal with it. Stay out of our business. Thus, outsiders are cut out, not seen or spoken to, and utterly unwelcome, to say the least. The helpful people then stop coming. If they're lucky, and their absence and continuous absences provide a continuous sense of welcome relief, however momentary. And what about the husband and father who stays at a low-paying job, or let's say a military job that keeps him away from his family for months on end, for no other reason than that he's established a strong camaraderie with fellow workers with whom he shares a mimetic desire of just staying together in the work tribe, no matter what. Meanwhile, he could do more for his family tribe if he left, but he won't leave. So his wife leaves him. That cheerful pest who's been pleading with him to leave his job is now gone, and he actually has a sense of relief until the next cheerful pest comes along, and she too will eliminate herself if he doesn't become aggressive with her, all because she doesn't understand that for him the tribe of work comes first. On a larger scale, people belong to tribes in the form of political parties that don't even serve them. Politicians are servants to the people, and some political parties let us plainly see that our representatives in that party are living in $100 million mansions, do not live in the communities they represent. In fact, keep guards who bear weapons that the individuals belonging to the party do not like, do not approve of. But they stay in the party for no other reason than that it is their tribe. Meanwhile, when decent, moral people lean in to tell these political party members, "Hey, just maybe you ought to leave that tribe because your party isn't serving you. You've got high crime, high taxes, bad schools, and poor transportation." You blast that individual one way or another just for talking about your problems, your tribe's problems. Let's consider an entire nation, united under a flag and bearing a song and a national bird and national flower and so on. They can look around and see a lack of sewer systems, lack of good education, lack of medical facilities, and overall lack of care. But the people in that tribe belonging to that nation continue having immense pride in the country and are ready to fight to the death to defend it because the tribe. Yep, just as Girard said, if you stick your nose in to help, you will be uniformly regarded by all of the people who belong to dysfunctional tribes as harmless, decent, and moral, making you the perfect candidate to scapegoat and sacrifice, thereby giving them a welcome sense of relief. The purpose of sacrifice, according to Girard, is to restore harmony to the community, to reinforce the social fabric. What is happening in these strange cases, according to Girard, is this: a floundering group or partnership, in order to hang together, will select the scapegoat that is the most criminal to attack. This victim can be either of two extremes, either the most powerful and therefore the least vulnerable, or the least powerful and therefore the most vulnerable. The social worker, there to lift you out of your poverty and downtrodden community, is least powerful, most vulnerable. The police officer dealing with a gang is the most powerful, least vulnerable. Both are ripe for the pickings off by the tribes they try to serve. And why? Because of a primitive inclination to put the tribe above morality, and a rejection or lack of strict rules that a religion provides. This entity will be completely eliminated, and their absence will not be regarded as a social or spiritual loss, but regarded as a relief, albeit a brief relief, to the group or partnership. The absence of this helpful pest allows the tribe a chance to catch their breath just long enough to refocus on their united goal of staying together or getting some important job done, only until they feel the need to sacrifice another scapegoat, and then another, and another. So, what does this tell us? Well, people trying to be helpful to those stuck inside tribes had better think twice, because Gerard provides us with a fresh way of looking at Lord of the Flies. Some of you might be wondering, as I have wondered, if during a discussion of Lord of the Flies in, say, a typical 9th grade English classroom, where this story is usually discussed, a reference to Piggy as having been sacrificed for the sake of group unity might widen a few pairs of eyes. But Gerard would matter-of-factly shrug and respond that human nature simply plays out this way, and nothing can be done about it. But this is easier for us to understand, those of us who have been around the block and experienced quite a bit of human interaction. Why would we be surprised by this when, if we really look, we easily see the mimetic theory play out? Look around. In our everyday lives, we see the nicest people continuously hurt, including ourselves, as we extend kindnesses only to end up discovering the reality of the expression, they bite the hand that feeds them. Kind and generous individuals, if only giving of time and a modicum of care, due solely to their blatant difference from the troubled souls they choose to serve, can find themselves sacrificed as Gerard's scapegoats when mimetic rivalry replaces mimetic desire and things fall apart. But remember, as I said at the beginning, we all become scapegoats and we all become violent. None of us is immune from becoming the victim or from being the perpetrator who enacts mimetic violence upon a scapegoat. Some might argue that jealousy is at play here, that the mere presence of the more moral and helpful people on the periphery of the pathetic group exposes their deficiencies and is too painful to bear, and so these outsiders must be eliminated. Well, this is a highly plausible theory indeed, but it is not a matter Gerard felt we needed to consider at all. Jealousy isn't necessarily the case. Let's remove jealousy from the issue completely. Jack isn't jealous of Piggy or Simon or Ralph in any regard. The abusive husband isn't jealous of his helpful mother-in-law who occasionally pops over with a casserole and is happy to watch the kids. Remember, this is an inexplicable, primitive inclination, a primitive tribal inclination that protects the group or partnership. It keeps the tribe together at all costs, above morality, above other supreme values like compassion, care, generosity of time, money, or spirit. The group is put on a pedestal, even if the group is a hideous, decadent, disreputable, uncivilized, brutish, unsightly glop. Sound like anyone you know? Now, speaking of unsightly, when Jack begins appearing to the others with his face and body painted primitively in fierce-looking streaks of black from coal and red from pig's blood and white from clay, he is, quite frankly, no longer human. He now leads by fear, not at all so much concerned about survival, but about his own sheer brute power. The weak, pale boys are sheep, shifting together as one, following this leader out of pure fear. They are each uniting with clarity in fresh mimetic desire behind this bad guy, now cutting good Ralph out as Ralph has been the most helpful since Piggy's demise. As Gerard would have predicted, as you might have guessed, and as becomes the case, the boys, for no other reason than to continue in this state of moral flux, to simply hang together, unite against Ralph. Considering the fact that in tough times everyone should be pulling together to cooperate, and full well knowing that Ralph is a lad with generally good ideas, actually Ralph cannot be trusted, as he betrayed Piggy, and could easily betray any of them. He could easily throw any of them under the bus, as we say, and they and we all know this instinctively. Ralph is simply the third in line to be picked off. He's helpful. And here comes this primitive inclination, as Gerard called it, to completely eliminate especially helpful people. This inclination is beyond perplexing or ironic. It's truly sheer madness, and not a pattern of life conducive to cooperation and civilization. Human nature alone guides us to completely eliminate the scapegoat whom we mutually target or blame for disrupting what they might say were their ease and focus, that content feeling we have when we know that, despite having glitches in our partnerships or groups, we have unity. As part of a ritual that helps strengthen their unity against Simon, then Piggy, and Ralph, the boys who have lumped themselves with Jack maintain mimesis, shared desire, with him. They, too, wield rough-hewn spears and smear their faces with ash so they all appear as ruthless savages. Thus, they have completely cast off civility, just as at the beginning of the story, the boys from Jack's school had cast off their absurd capes of their school uniforms. Now we see what was hidden beneath the formal representation of extreme formality and civility: raw, brute, sinister savagery. And now, let us turn to the twins, Sam and Eric, in terms of Gerard's theory. Gerard claimed that all twins, in a literary and anthropological sense, are feared cross-culturally because, as he said, they are harbingers of indiscriminate violence. To primitive societies, twins represent the ultimate threat to those societies. Why? Because twins represent a loss of distinctions. A loss of distinctions? What does that mean? Lord of the Flies opens with a brief but clear introduction to Sam and Eric, who continually point to one another and repeat their names. He's Sam, and I'm Eric. I'm Eric, and he's Sam. The scene seems to provide a touch of levity and seems gratuitous unless we consider Gerard's point that a lack of differentiation, or maximum similarities, I repeat, a lack of differentiation or maximum similarities among brothers or between twins makes them vulnerable in a system structured on differences. These united entities are, and I'm quoting, dangerously exposed to the onset of a sacrificial crisis. And here, most of us in the civilized world just think twins are super cute. Gerard, really? Twins vulnerable to becoming sacrificial scapegoats during a mimetic breakdown simply because they're twins? Let us continue. Toward the end of our island horror story, after scapegoats 1 and 2, Simon and Piggy, have been eliminated, scapegoat number 3, Ralph, is threatened by Jack and his savage followers. Enter the twins, Sam and Eric. While the twins have been tasked by Jack with keeping an eye out for Ralph in order to catch Ralph and kill him, at the same time they betray Jack by helping Ralph, by giving Ralph information about Jack's tactics. They inform Ralph to listen for certain wild animal sounds that are merely sounds being made by Jack's hunters, hunters of Ralph. Meanwhile, we aren't sure whether we can trust the twins to not betray Ralph's position to Jack. For example, if they were threatened by Jack to tell the truth. Jack knows that the twins were once part of Ralph's group, so clearly he wouldn't completely trust them. And Ralph knows that they've shifted loyalty to Jack, as they're now dressed like savages and are indeed working for him. The twins are truly only united between themselves and not part of either group. Their strongest mimetic desire to survive will be shared with one another, not with any group. Thus, they are an innate threat and are definitely on the growing scapegoating list. As Girard points out, the group, with its mimetic desire, shared goal, is always less focused on goodness than unity. And if bloodshed is required to maintain a primitive brotherhood, then so be it. Some might suggest that Girard mentions twins as harbingers of doom because they can represent rivalry. Cain and Abel, Romulus and Remus. But this is not at all the case. Sam and Eric, who look alike, finish one another's sentences, and who both agree to serve Jack and help Ralph, are highly undifferentiated. Their similarity makes them double trouble. Absurd as it seems, in a primitive sense, twins pose a doubly dangerous threat to group unity. And with continued escalation of frustration and violence, there would be another and another character eliminated. Which reminds me, before we close, let's revisit the issue of narcissists. Can we in any way make a connection between narcissists and Girard's mimetic theory? After all, we can certainly say that Jack and even Ralph, to an extent, are narcissists, correct? We could say Jack is an overt narcissist and Ralph a covert narcissist. In the end, the narcissist ends up quite alone, correct? The narcissist follows this pattern perfectly because this self-centered, self-focused type has his or her own desire, self-protection, glorification, self-centeredness, period. The narcissist is a tribe unto himself or herself. Everyone encircling the narcissist is better than they are, so they must continually abuse and eliminate these moral, caring people to their own obvious detriment. But at least they remain their own tribe. And let's take a moment to consider whether the story would have played out differently, and if Girard's theory would have applied if different microcosms of society had been covered in this story. For example, if British schoolgirls, business professionals, or church vicars would have behaved differently in the terrifying situation in which the boys were thrust. Well, unless they suppressed all base, primitive inclinations and operated under the strict rules of a religion, their mimetic desire to survive would have led to a similar outcome: mimetic rivalry, scapegoating, sacrifice, and violence. Period. Full stop. According to Girard, we primitive people, with our primitive inclinations, cannot help but react to our need for social harmony by continually finding scapegoats to sacrifice in order to maintain a sense of unity, however briefly, until we find our next especially nice victim. The only thing that will save our hapless souls from this absurd, vicious cruelty and ensuing social malaise and degradation, the only thing that can spare us from mutually assured self-destruction stemming from an original mimetic desire, violent mimesis, are hard rules, the level of strict religious forces that force us to catch ourselves should we even consider neglecting another's feelings, much less hurting them metaphysically or with true aggression. These are the type of forces that help us self-regulate our behavior and allow us to enjoy living in a collaborative civil society, a society that flourishes with truth, justice, and light. Spiritual forces that were utterly lacking in Lord of the Flies, and, ladies and gentlemen, forces that are sorely lacking in much of modern society today.
You always heard the sweetest rose and crush it till the petals fall. You always break the kindest heart with a hasty word you can't recall. So if I broke your heart last night, it's because I love you more.